Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, everybody, this is True Powers Mine, and this is TPSR Live. TPIMSR Live, excuse me. I'm very frustrated. I tried to upload this video several times. I got reports from overseas that it was unavailable. So, once again, I tried it again, and indeed, it's unavailable. So, we're going to play the MarK from Anahiem interview that happened today, November 12, 2019, the year of our Lord, on the Carl Nelson Show, in its entirely uninterrupted. All I have to say, folks, I hope you enjoy. Let's do it.
Anahiem. Most of you know that MarK's not his real name. He's really not from Anahiem. So let me just give you a little background for those of you who are not familiar with MarK from Anahiem. During the early 1990s, MarK joined the legendary Vietnam War veteran David Hackworth and others to present an alternative to the John Birch Society's far-right wing agenda being presented on talk radio by the likes of Ollie North and G. Gordon Liddy. MarK is both a retired U.S. Marine Corps Mustang infantry officer and a retired LAPD patrol supervisor. He has provided intelligence briefings to high-ranking U.S. Armed Forces personnel, assisted both the state of California and the U.S. Department of Defense to rewrite police tactics manuals, and he has also provided counterterrorism training to U.S. State Department and NATO personnel. Now, since retiring, MarK has returned to a life, his words, I always say, his words, a lazy surfing beach bum, where he spends much of his time coaching and mentoring some of the most successful young female servers from around the world. MarK from Anahiem, welcome back to WL Radio.
And how is my fellow Facebook jail inmate Carl Nelson doing?
We're still here. We're cellies. We're Facebook cellies.
in jail without a bail. Yeah, listeners, seriously. I heard the previous guest on the show talking about you got to be careful when you're out there doing your business because they will send people your way to entrap you, get you caught up in something. But it's sad because Mr. Nelson, this radio station and this show in particular is one of the very few outlets out here in the United States where people can get an alternative point of view. And as you know, the listeners probably don't know this, but Mr. Nelson and I have been coming under some serious attack, especially in the social media. We're constantly in Facebook jail now where they throttle us or stop us from even doing things on the sites that we run. So, frankly, I'm surprised we've lasted this long in the media, Mr. Nelson, because I know they're trying to shut us down. Shut them down. Shut them down. But before we get started today, Mr. Nelson, I got to give a shout out to Steve Coakley Jr. I think he's in Ghana right now. And I believe he might be listening to the show today. You know, Steve's father, Steve Coakley, we used to call him the Boule Buster. And Dick Gregory and Steve and I used to do some very interesting shows with you back in the 90s. I miss that brother, man. I no longer use my answering machine, but the one message I never took off my answering machine was the last message that Steve Coakley left me before he passed on. So, miss that brother. Don't forget him. He was one of a kind, and he was an insight, especially since he had been part of the political machine in the Chicago area. I could only imagine what he would be able to share with us with the wealth of knowledge with all the drama going on in Chicago these days, especially now since your buddy, Charlie Beck's getting ready to head over there to perhaps be the next police commissioner. So. Your buddy. Hey, Charlie. I know he's listening because a whole bunch of LAPD cops are listening.
Yes, sir.
So, as I always do.
Well, let me just say this, though, I thank you because I didn't know I was in Facebook jail until you told me. So, thank you for at least letting me know if they locked me out.
Well, the sad thing about it, Mr. Nelson, and for the listeners out there who don't know this, Mr. Nelson is one of the busiest men I know on radio, and he's so humble. He's received several prestigious awards. I mean, he was the first individual to even interview Nelson Mandela when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison in South Africa. There's so many things you've done that people just don't know about, and I know you don't toot your horn, but the sad thing is, because he's so busy, I volunteered to assist Mr. Nelson with his Facebook fan page because there were so many people that were sending messages on an hourly basis. So I was one of the individuals who was an assistant on that Facebook site. Well, little did I know, Facebook decided to make me Carl Nelson. In other words, I would start posting on the Facebook site that I was the administrator for, and instead of my name coming up, it said the Carl Nelson Show. And in recent months, Facebook now has been accusing Carl Nelson of posting fake news. So when they accused Carl Nelson of posting fake news, at the same time they accused me of posting fake news, and which was putting us in the jail. So sadly, I had to remove myself as the assistant on your Facebook site just to survive at all on Facebook. And yeah, you didn't even know you were in Facebook jail until I told you. Yeah, we're going through some interesting times, but folks don't know Zuckerberg. His mentor was Rupert Murdoch, and one of the guys who's now supposedly heading the Facebook political postings is a far right-wing Trump supporter. So I'm surprised I'm still on there. And the sad thing is, Mr. Nelson, I don't spend much of my time in politics anymore. I spend most of my time with my surfers, and that's what I use Facebook for, is to connect with my surfers from around the world. So it's kind of tough for me because I haven't been able to communicate with most of them. I got surfers right now, in Chile. They're having riots. They're having earthquakes. I don't have any surfers in Bolivia, but Bolivia just had a coup in their country where both the president and the vice president had to flee the country. So there's a lot of drama going on in South America and Central America that most of us never hear about. And the only reason I know about it is because I have surfers in those parts of the world. So, but like I always do before we start the show, for those who've never heard me, I would just tell you, don't believe anything I tell you on this show today. Do your own homework, do your own research, you make up your own mind. But I challenge anybody to come back on this show and say I've ever lied to them, purposely gave them misinformation or disinformation. And today's show, Mr. Nelson, yesterday was Veterans Day, Sunday was Marine Corps birthday. I dedicate this show to the memory of Robert Smalls and also to Harriet Tubman. So when we come back from the break, I'll give you a little bit more information about those two individuals.
All right. 800-450-7876. Speak to MarK in Anahiem. He calls after this short break on 1450.
1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is MarK in Anahiem. As most of you know, MarK's not his real name, and he's really not living in Anahiem. Speak to him with a question. 800-450-7876. Before we left for the break, you were telling us you're dedicating the show to two individuals.
Yeah, Anahiem. We call it Anacrime. Yeah, I also want to give a shout out to Patrick Weaver. I know he's listening today. Patrick has always done a good job of making a podcast of this show to make it available to the listeners who may have missed it or who want to go back and hear it. So thanks a lot to Pat for doing it, because I don't know why, but this radio station doesn't seem to put the podcast out. I still haven't figured that one out. But when it comes to dedicating this show, dedicating my appearance of the day, I'm a proud Gullah Geechee. Spent most of my childhood on dirt poor, segregated Johns Island, South Carolina. And it's sad because there are so many blacks, unapologetic blacks, whose story fighting in the South Carolina Low Country during the Civil War is just not being told. And my all-time favorite Civil War veteran was a man named Robert Smalls. Now, I spent my last year of high school down in Beaufort, South Carolina. I graduated from Battery Creek. But down in Beaufort, South Carolina, they had a middle school named Robert Smalls Middle School. And for those who are not familiar, Robert Smalls was a Low Country South Carolina Geechee, Gullah. He was a house slave, and when he was like 12 years old, his mom did not want him to be ignorant in regards to how the field slaves were treated. So his mom asked the slave master to put him out in the fields. And as a teenager, he moved to Charleston, South Carolina. And then the Civil War breaks out. During the time in the Civil War, he was actually a trusted pilot on one of the Confederate ships, the CSS Planner. And on May 12, 1862, he actually stole that ship, carrying his family and other slaves to freedom, taking them inside the Union Navy blockade that was outside the Charleston Harbor. And on that CSS Planner, they had code books for the Confederate States of America. And of course, Robert Smalls was very knowledgeable of the Charleston Harbor, so the information that he provided the Union Navy was, invaluable. He went on to pilot several other ships during the Civil War. And he became so legendary, Mr. Nelson, that he was actually used as a recruiting tool to get other people to join both the Union Army and the Union Navy during the Civil War. And have you ever heard of him?
No, not at all.
And so, it's sad because he was actually he's the first black captain of a Navy ship. Then, of course, because he wasn't a graduate of the Naval Academy, they refused to acknowledge him as a captain when it was time for him to get his pension. So he was later commissioned as an officer in the 1st South Carolina Volunteer, which actually came under the 33rd U.S. Colored Troops, because back in those days we used to have what's called CT in the Union Armies. The CT was stood for Colored Troops. So he was a member of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers under the 33rd U.S. Colored Infantry. After the war, he became a South Carolina congressman. And if you ever see the movie Birth of a Nation, that movie depicts how the blacks had taken over the South Carolina legislature, eating fried chicken and watermelon. Well, that was based on the fact that Robert Smalls had become so instrumental in getting other blacks now to become politically active during Reconstruction. And not only did he have to fight for all the blacks, but he had to also fight to get his pension from the Navy, which he eventually got, but he still never got all the money he deserved from what he had done. So, I'm always touting Robert Smalls as my all-time favorite Civil War veteran, and I just want to leave one quote regarding Robert Smalls that I've always tried to live by. When I say whether we're colored, whether we're Negroes, whether we're blacks, whether we're African Americans, and this is a direct quote from Robert Smalls: "My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them is in this country proves them to be equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life." Now you fast forward to James Brown, and James Brown had the song, "I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door and I'll get it myself." And that's what I live by. So I prided myself most of my life going out and doing things that other folks say that we can't do. That's why I was involved in sailing and surfing, because blacks can't swim, blacks can't even float. Okay, and I'm very well known in the surfing community. So Robert Smalls is the first person I dedicate my appearance here today, but the second person, the only person who could even rival Robert Smalls, in my humble opinion, as far as my all-time favorite Civil War hero, and that would be Harriet Tubman. And I know some folks got some things to say about that movie, so I'll bring it on. But the only thing I'll say about the movie Harriet, which I saw last week, was that the movie did not show why I hold her in such high regard, and we'll get into that later. But first, I want to just get into a little house cleaning here, Mr. Nelson. Are you familiar with the name Atalania Jefferson?
No, I'm not. And before we start the house cleaning, you mentioned Smalls, Robert Smalls.
Yes,
he's I get great grandfather or ancestor of James Small, Professor Small. We have him here on this radio station quite a bit. But go ahead.
It's a small world, ain't it? No pun intended, right? So, Atalania Jefferson, I'm sorry. The last time I made an appearance on the show, Mr. Nelson, was because people in this country, especially those of us of color, seem to have just lost our minds after the tragic shooting of the female down in Houston, Texas, by the white police officer who was later arrested. I'm just going to tell you folks right now, he was charged with murder. I don't see him being convicted of murder. So just prepare yourselves to be emotionally distraught, because in my humble opinion, they've already overcharged him, which will guarantee him not being found guilty of that charge. And then folks will be all upset again. Anyway, we were bombarded with her name. When's the last time you heard anybody talk about her, Mr. Nelson?
I have not. Who?
In fact, the only reason they mentioned her name in the last week is because tragically her father has now died. And a lot of people are saying her father died of a broken heart. But this is what is happening, folks, especially with the Trump administration. Trump has studied Hitler, and I've studied Hitler. Trust me, I've studied Hitler because many of my mentors were former World War II Nazis. There's such thing as a former Nazi. Trump is doing all the things that Hitler was doing in the rise of the Weimar Republic. And every week you're hit with something else. Boom, 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 boom. Psychological warfare. And then boom, it's no longer in a news cycle. And yet we become so impassioned, so emotionally distraught, so emotionally involved, and don't realize every time you're doing that, you're raising your blood pressure, you're risking your chances of a heart attack or a cerebral hemorrhage. And this is psychological warfare at its best. So I just want to say I appreciate the fact that some of your listeners have contacted me because of some of the past shows I've done. One of the shows I mentioned right before we left the air, that if you want to know what's in your tap water, just take a pot of tap water, put it on a low heat on your stove, and let that water slowly evaporate, and then look at your pot. Mr. Nelson, I've had listeners send me photographs going, damn, I thought this brother was crazy. And they went and did what I told them, and you see this huge sediment inside your pot where the water used to be. That's what's clogging your arteries. It's the crap that's in the water. You know, they'll tell you it's all about don't eat butter and all this other stuff. You're drinking water every day from the tap that has the chemicals in it that when it gets into your bloodstream, it collects along the walls of your veins and arteries until the point that you now have a limited amount of passage of blood, which leads, of course, to heart attacks. And, you know, I know you had Tariq could tell you better than anybody else when it comes to the water. But I also had some folks to contact me and apologize to me, which I respect them for, because they thought I was paranoid, they thought I was conspiratorial. But as I always tell them, do their own research. And, you know, these folks came back and they actually had the moral courage to come back and tell me in Facebook messages, sometime probably on some of my Facebook sites, that they went out and they actually wrote down what I said to go check on them for themselves. And they found out, guess what? I was telling them the truth. So, you know, I know, Mr. Nelson, a lot of folks are upset about this movie, Harriet. And I just want to remind the listeners that, you know, Dick Gregory and I were close. God, I wish I could share some of the telephonic conversations we had, because they were so much more fun and unedited compared to when we had to be on the radio and had to be careful how we, you know, said things. But the movie Selma was one of the movies that really upset me, because that movie totally disrespected Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory had been down there twice and was beaten twice before Martin Luther King Jr. ever showed up for the third march. And except for one line in the movie that mentions Dick Gregory along with folk singer, civil rights activist Joan Baez, there's no mention of Greg in the whole movie. And, you know, one time I was on the telephone with Greg, and he would always tell me, he says, hey, bro, just let it go. So when Dick Gregory received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, the following night, they had an all-star exclusive comedy tribute over at the Ricardo Montalban Theater in Hollywood. And I was still mad about this Selma movie, you know. So I'm just going to share with you what Dick Gregory said to me. Because I said, you know, Greg, because they had a photograph up on the wall in the Montalban Theater of Dick Gregory down in Selma. Even though you don't see any depiction of Gregory in that movie. And so I said to Greg, you know, I'm still mad about this movie, and I don't understand how you could be so, you know, cool about the fact that they disrespected you. And I asked him, well, you know, what did you learn from all that? And this is what Dick Gregory said. This is a direct quote from Dick Gregory on February 3rd, 2015. What should we learn? Next month, I'll be headed back to Selma for the 50th anniversary. And if we were standing there 50 years ago, as we will next month, we would be surprised if police did not beat us. And that was Dick Gregory. So, you know, the brother's gone, but he's not forgotten. And I only mentioned the movie Selma because I understand how some of us are upset about the movie Harriet. Because damn well I know I'm upset about the movie Selma. But you, Mr. Nelson, you and I go back, you know, more than 20 years. And you remember, oh man, a break's coming up because the folks don't want to hear this.
We'll let him have it on the other side. Folks, you want to join us? 800-450-7876. And do us a favor, like Mark says, we're in the Facebook jail, so email or tell your friends, call them up, or, you know, tell them that Mark from Anahiem is on the radio. Reach out to us right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Get prepped to the Carl Nelson Show on Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. This is Mark from Anahiem. Again, 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark. Let's go back to Mark. You're about to tell us about another movie. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, you know, in relationship to the movie Harriet, see, the subject of Harriet Tubman is personal for me because, one, like I said earlier, I spent most of my childhood in South Carolina, low country, and two, Harriet Tubman is one of my all-time favorite spooks. In fact, 10 out of the top 11 of my all-time favorite spooks are women, and Harriet Tubman is one of them. My daughter grew up in my home here, every morning waking up with a portrait on her wall above her bed that included Harriet Tubman. See, so I'm not one of these Johnny-come-lately folks to jump on the Harriet Tubman bandwagon. And, you know, you and I go back more than 2 decades. And I'm sure you remember back when UPN television and Fox News were merging and all that. And they came out with a television show called The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And how did Jesse Jackson respond to the television shows The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer?
He called us up. That was they was doing a show at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he called up and he says, I want some people to come out to Paramount Studios at I think 8 o'clock in the morning. We want to show up and, you know, and show people that we don't want this movie on TV. It was the guy who was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, black British guy.
Oh, another British actor who happens to be colored.
Right. And they went out there and they blocked traffic in front of Paramount Studios. And about 10 o'clock, Jesse calls me and says, where are all these people coming from? I said, you asked them to turn out, didn't you? He said, yeah, but don't they have jobs? What do they do all day? I said, well, they figured you call them to come out and protest. And then, you know, they think it's meaningful. That's why they showed up.
And I have to say,
so many people showed up.
And I have to say, because she may be listening today, Molly Bell was one of the folks out there on the front lines doing that. And you had some listeners who wanted to know my opinion about the television show because it hadn't aired yet. See, this was a protest before the show had aired. And I told them, I said, listen, I know you think you're fighting the system, and I know you mean well. But I was trained by the white man. I know how they think. I know how they operate. And I think you might be protesting a little too much, and your listeners didn't want to hear that. Now, when that show finally aired, people saw the show, and they're like, what's the big deal? And for a lot of whites who may have been sympathetic to blacks out there fighting against disgusting depiction of blacks on television, when they watched the television show, they couldn't find anything that was really disgusting. And why not? Because the blacks who meant well, who joined Jesse on the front lines out there protesting, had protested so well that by the time the television show aired, those disgusting scenes had been removed. So except for the people who had seen the premiere show, and, you know, Miss Notes, I mean, they actually had a commercial. God, I wish back in those days I had taped it. They had a commercial where a black guy was hanging from a tree. And here you've got the black guy who you said, you know, a guy from Prince of Bel-Air who was starring on the show. He and his white slave master are riding horseback. And as they ride by the tree of this black man hanging on the tree, the brother says, what a waste of a good pair of boots. That's how vile and disgusting this TV show was. Unfortunately, most of the United States who saw that television show never got to see that because thanks to the protesting, those kind of things have been removed. I say that because I've seen the movie Harriet, and I think it's one of the best movies I've seen all year. And the only thing I can surmise from a lot of the people complaining and protesting about it is, one, they haven't actually seen the movie, or two, they protested so much that many of the things that they were complaining about have been removed from the movie before it was released to the general public nationwide. Yeah, there's some things about the movie I don't like, but if you want, come on, that's what I do. I do movie reviews. I mean, you got thousands of people who read my movie reviews every week and every month. That's what I do is read books and read movies and tell you whether to see it or not, or, you know, make up your own mind. But this movie was one of the best movies I've seen all year. And if I was to be critical about any movie, I wouldn't go see any of them. But like I said, my main criticism of this movie is the fact that the movie does not show my number one reason for why Harriet Tubman rivals Robert Smalls. And so I'm going to share this with you because it's not in the movie, so I'm not giving anything away. I was very disappointed that only at the very end of the movie, in fact, you know what makes me so mad about this, Mr. Nelson? They actually used this to promote the movie. You see a scene in the movie where Harriet Tubman is holding a rifle, and she's leading black Union soldiers, and she tells them, you know, to aim, get ready to fire. Well, that's not really shown in the movie. what you actually see is that one little scene with some words at the bottom of the screen and closed caption. And they briefly talk for like maybe 20 seconds at the most about how she led this raid. So let me enlighten the listener who may not be aware of this. I spent my last year of high school down in Beaufort, South Carolina. And just like Robert Smalls, who was from Beaufort, South Carolina, down in the Beaufort-Colleton County areas, you have the Combahee River. Mr. Nelson, Harriet Tubman, a black woman, a former slave, was the person who on June 2nd, 1863, led 150 black Union soldiers on the Combahee River, where they raided several plantations and rescued more than 750 slaves. Many of the slaves later on joined the Union Army. And oh, by the way, not only did they raid those plantations of the slaves, they fired and fought off Confederate soldiers. And they also burned a lot of the fields so that these Confederate soldiers wouldn't be able to provide the Confederate Army with rice and other crops that they were growing on these plantations. And this is not in the movie. Imagine a black woman leading 150 soldiers on raids to save more than 750 slaves. And that's not in the movie. And sadly, I've spoken to several blacks, and I'm talking educated blacks. I'm talking about intelligent blacks who have seen that movie. And I asked them, did they know about the Combahee Ferry raid? And they're like, what are you talking about? See, this is what happens when people put our history out there, but they don't put our history out there. They put his story out there. That's why I'm upset about the movie. All this other stuff people are complaining about the white guy saving her and all this other stuff. And I know you got some callers who are probably fuming because I've already been attacked on Facebook by several people representing, the African descendants of slaves, ADOS. So bring it on. I'll just say this. In South Carolina, a lot of whites still brag about the Revolutionary War guerrilla, Francis Marion. He was called the Swamp Fox. Trust me, folks, Francis Marion had nothing on what Harriet Tubman was doing down there. In fact, Mr. Nelson, just to show you how prolific Harriet Tubman was at guerrilla warfare, the United States Army actually adopted the tactics that she used on those raids to free those 750 plus slaves and other raids during the Civil War. And I'm going to tell you straight out, as a Marine Corps officer, when I was in Quantico, Virginia, in school at the basic school, I used some of Harriet Tubman's tactics to pass a class that few other people in the class passed. I also used some of her tactics when I was out stationed at 29 Palms when they tried to see whether or not my first day in the Mojave Desert and not knowing anything about the Mojave Desert, they put me out there on a live fire exercise, hoping that the only black in the battalion would fail. And, thanks to good old Harriet Tubman's tactics, I used her tactics. And not only did I not fail, I captured the colonel from the opposite side, and they refused to acknowledge that I had captured him. And they sent me back to the rear. True story. So let's bring it on.
All right. Any folks got questions about Harriet, about the ADOS movement? 800-450-7876. But when we do things like this, they're not going to call. They'll
I don't know about that, Mr. Nelson. I know you guys
I'm throwing out the
waiting.
challenge. I'm throwing out the challenge. Call in there. All of you will support them because let's say this. Many folks understand where they are from listening to us because we don't promote that kind of stuff. But but I know they also listen as well. But they never call. But they tweet afterwards. They hide behind.
Oh, of course. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to hear from some of the people who have seen the movie and tell us what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. Because this movie has become a divisive tool within the black community. And I single out ADOS, but I'm about to tell you folks, you need to do your homework and find out who the hell ADOS is. That was an organization devised by Steve Bannon. Last time I checked, Steve Bannon is no friend of the black community. And one of the leaders of ADOS is Yvette Carnell, who's a Donald Trump supporter. These are the folks that you're following and telling you not to go see a movie. So, you know, and if you want to talk about ADOS and reparations, I'll talk about that too, because I don't support ADOS or reparations.
You start the fire now. 800-450-7876. Kiki's calling us first from Iowa. Kiki, you're on with MarK from Anahiem.
Ooh,
Hey,
Kiki.
hey guys. MarK, you read my mind. I was just about to ask you about ADOS because there's a lot of things going on right now. Now there's like another conference coming up called the Foundational Black Conference or something with Tariq Nasheed, and now they're beefing. So can you tell us why you don't support ADOS and who really is ADOS? Because I even heard some stuff about this whole Byron Allen case and how it's not about the civil rights act either. That, you know, that's another thing that's being pulled over our heads as a distraction. And like you said before, sometimes the very thing that we're fighting, we're actually letting it be like it'll come back on us pretty much. So can you talk about those things? Because I think it's time to,
as soon as the break is over, as soon as the break is over, I will address that.
All right, thanks, Kiki. As you mentioned, we got to take a short
Thank
break.
you.
800-450-7876 to speak to MarK. Your call's next on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
This update is sponsored by Unbound.org. A girl in Kenya dreams of becoming a doctor. An elder in Guatemala dreams of being part of a community. Reach out and change their world, and it will change your own. Unbound.
I'm not just saying this, folks. This is MarK from Anahiem. Before we go back to MarK and answers Kiki's question at Iowa, let me just tell you, coming up in the next few days, you're going to hear retired professor of critical thinking. His name is Dr. David Horn. He's just back from Ghana, and he's going to give us an update on the Back to Africa movement in Ghana and also reparations. Also, a metaphysician, Dr. B, is going to join us. He's going to talk about mind control and perception management, and also telomeres and parasites. So if you're in the DMV, tell all your friends to keep the radios locked on 1450 WOL. So anyway, MarK, I'm going to let you respond to Kiki's questions.
Yeah, first question out the gate. Put me in the hot seat. I love it. Folks, don't believe anything I tell you. You do your own research. Now, I've already had some people attack me on Facebook, and I responded in the way I'm going to respond right now. And I will have to say those folks are like, huh? What? ADOS. Steve Bannon, which I am definitely no fan of, but you know, I give credit where it's due. Mr. Nelson, Steve Bannon and Roger Stone are two of the filthiest but most politically adept at dirty tricks when it comes to politics. The only other guy I could even think of that was in that same zone with them was a guy from South Carolina, you know, the one who got Ronald Reagan to talk about the welfare moms and all that. And Bannon is a nihilist, okay? Bannon knows exactly how to push buttons. And he's going to throw Roger Stone under the bus. You know, Roger Stone, I've severed all my ties now with the Nixon Library down here after more than 3 decades, because after President Obama got elected, I noticed how I was starting to be racially profiled over at the Nixon Library when I go there. Now, those idiots over there don't even know I'm one of the people who was actually sought out to help recommend a director for that Nixon Library. But, you know, they bring in these new white security guards and a few house Negro blacks, too, that were starting to follow me around when I'm walking around the library. My children grew up in that library. But you know what? One of the things when Obama was president, I stopped spending my money in places where being disrespected. And I wasn't a fan of Obama. I didn't vote for him in I didn't vote for him in 2008, and I didn't vote for him in 2012. However, I don't tolerate disrespect. That's why I don't go to Vegas, because I remember how the state of Nevada treated Obama. I don't go to Arizona, because I remember how Arizona treated Obama. And no black governor would get away with pointing their fingers in Donald Trump's face the way the female white governor of Arizona did when Obama was president. See, I don't take that stuff lightly. And so I won't ever have anything to do with the Nixon Library again, because the last time I went there, I was and in fact, it's funny because half the people who worked there, Mr. Nelson, are people I knew at LAPD. Okay. So anyway, I say that because when it comes to Steve Bannon, go back and you do your homework, folks. Just do some research on your own and find out the connections of Steve Bannon to the ADOS movement. He devised most of that. And then after he devised it, but have black folks out there as the front people, then you get somebody like Laura Ingraham who comes out and goes, well, why is ADOS supporting all black people? Not all black people in this country came from Africa. They should only be concerned with the ones who actually came here from Africa. Laura Ingraham. Mr. Nelson, come on. Is Laura Ingraham a friend of the black community? But Laura Ingraham puts that out there, and now black folks are going, yeah, you know, she's right. So now you got the black folks in the ADOS movement who are fractionalized and going, okay, wait a minute now. We're not talking about you blacks that came here from the Caribbean, as if they're not descendants of slaves. Come on, folks, the African, the slave diaspora, come on, man. You go down to Brazil, up until about 8 years ago, Brazil had more blacks per population than any country in Africa. Okay? And most folks don't even know that. Because it's sad, because most Brazilians don't even know they're Negroes till they come here. That's why I'm so popular in the surfing community among the Brazilians, because when they come here, I'm the only one that shows them any love. Because these white folks hate the Brazilians taking over surfing. They're taking over professional bull riding too. So anyway, when you look at the people who are behind the scenes that are actually orchestrating this to divide and conquer the black community, folks don't even do their homework. They just, it's like a seat cushion. You take on the impression of the last butt that sat on you, man. And then you go out and regurgitate and repeat this stuff without doing your homework. As far as reparations, okay, Mr. Nelson, I came on your show back in 1994, and I know you got some listeners today who are diehard Mr. Peoples and all those folks that were into the reparations movement. This is what I said. I keep things simple, okay? Now you got all these colored folks running around with their little license plates with their Masonic symbols on it, and they're so proud to be members of Prince Hall and everything else, and they call themselves free and accepted Masons. Now most white Masons, by the way, don't, at least not privately, they don't recognize black Masons. Because to be a free and accepted Mason, you cannot be a slave or a descendant of a slave. So how the hell can you now qualify for reparations as a descendant of a slave while at the same time calling yourself a free and accepted Mason? I just call a spade a spade. But the most important thing for me, Mr. Nelson, because, you know, I'll never be no Mason or anybody else. I don't join no fraternities or any other secret societies. I'm my own man. I don't kiss nobody's butt and I don't kiss anybody's ring. My main reason why I don't support reparations is once the Japanese accepted money for what was done at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese no longer can talk about it. You cannot pay me enough money for what's been done to my ancestors. And you're not going to buy me off by trying to offer me reparations so that I can't tell people what's been going on. In fact, Mr. That's the main reason why I'm always in Facebook jail, because when I post stuff to remind people exactly how filthy this country has always been, Facebook now is taking my postings down and accusing me of hate speech. So I hope that answers Kiki's questions on the first two things. But then she talked about Byron Allen. Okay, I'm going to try to be diplomatic here, Mr. Nelson, because I know you bring Mr. Allen on your show sometimes. I like Byron Allen. He used to be involved in a show called Real People. In 1969, I went to visit some relatives up in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. McKeesport is a suburb of Pittsburgh. That's where, for the first time, I got to see, up close and personal, Victor Cianca. Victor Cianca, for you folks out there, was a street cop, Pittsburgh street cop, and he spent his entire life directing traffic. And this guy was so phenomenal in the way he would direct traffic. He had been featured on all kinds of TV shows from the early 60s up until basically till he retired in 83. And Byron Allen was a part of the show called Real People, and they featured Victor Cianca on that show. In fact, it's 50 years, Mr. Nelson. It was 50 years this past summer, because I was up there in 1969 when I saw Victor Cianca, may he rest in peace. So I liked the show when Byron Allen was on Real People. I also liked Byron Allen when he had a CF Entertainment. But then, like I always say, never get your honey where you get your money. He married one of his employees. CF Entertainment became Entertainment Studios Incorporated. And I noticed he was no longer really focusing on TV shows that had a social impact, especially for those conscious within the community. It was all now like, you know, other folks trying to be all about making money. And he has some very interesting ties to such organizations as Bain Capital. For you folks who don't know, Bain Capital is Mitt Romney. You know, in the 70s, a lot of AM stations were going under. And Clear Channel came in and bought up all these stations. Folks brag about how Coast to Coast AM is the most popular show on radio. That's because Clear Channel bought up all those radio stations and gave Coast to Coast free of charge. Same thing with Rush Limbaugh. They gave Rush Limbaugh free of charge to these radio stations where they didn't have to pay for advertisement. And so the station's like, yeah, we'll carry a free show. That's 3 hours we don't have to worry about. That's why these folks are on the air so prolifically. But then, Mitt Romney came in with Bain Capital and destroyed Clear Channel. So, Clear Channel is nothing like what it was before. And much of what you hear today on radio when they say iHeart Radio, that was formerly Clear Channel. And, Mr. Allen also has some interesting ties to Sinclair Group, which I damn sure have no love for. Their frontman house Negro right now is Armstrong Williams. And with Sinclair Group, if they are able to achieve, which they probably will, with this new Trump Supreme Court and House of Representatives not doing a damn thing, and the U.S. Senate controlled by the far right, Sinclair will own 77% of all television stations in this country. So when you see a man, I don't give a damn whether he's black, brown, white, yellow, whatever. If he's in bed with Bain Capital and Sinclair Group, he lost my respect a long time ago because I know who these folks are. So it appears that, he wanted to be out there and, be like those guys. And now he comes in with his entertainment studies and they bought the Weather Channel. I've come on this show many times, Mr. Nelson, and tell you, the far right, the Tea Party libertarians, they want to destroy the Weather Channel. Why? They want everybody to be able to pay money on an app. You have to have a smartphone. You have to have an iPad. And when there's a natural disaster, you have to pay money to some app to get updates on a hurricane, on an earthquake, on a tornado, on a flood. Now, Mr. Nelson, when there's a natural disaster, what's the first thing that goes out?
A warning.
Your electricity.
Oh.
Or your damn communications. And since they're getting rid of all landlines, including myself now, I no longer have a landline. So even when my lights go out now, thanks to my stupid Wi-Fi that I have no telephone service. So how the hell are you going to contact some app when smartphones and cell phones and the cell towers are out during the damn storm? The Weather Channel for the last 8 years has been ranked the #1 most trusted news source, 24-hour news source in the United States. And they're going to try to take that puppy down. So all I can say is this. Based on what I've been watching, I believe Byron Allen is allowing himself to be used to get the sympathy of the blacks, knowing that once this case goes to the Supreme Court, since Donald Trump now has his 5-4 advantage on the Supreme Court, and DACA's coming up. Okay, all these children just left school today, Mr. Nelson, down here in LA, protesting because they know the Supreme Court is going to get rid of DACA. And by the way, and I came on the show, Mr. Nelson, told your listeners, why would you be stupid enough to give the federal government your information if they didn't know about you to be included under DACA? Because now the Supreme Court is going to come back, get rid of DACA. And now the people they never knew about before, they know about them because you voluntarily gave your information to the federal government. Hey, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. But hey, I told you. I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. Well, it's the same thing with this whole thing, Mr. Nelson. I've always had my suspicions about Scalia dying on that Bohemian Grove ranch down there. Iran-Contra war criminal, Poindexter's ranch in Texas. No autopsy. And I always wonder what cases would be coming up before the Supreme Court that Scalia would not go along with the John Birch Society, Iran, war contra criminals who are back in office thanks to Trump. And dude, they're back. Even that stuff going on in Bolivia, Venezuela, South America, Central America, dude, you got these John Birch Society, the same guys that were in the Reagan administration that were trying to do all this crap, but got caught under the Boland Amendment when Hassan Fuss got shot down in Nicaragua. They are now back, Mr. Nelson. They're wealthier. And they're using private funding, so Congress is not even in. Well, Congress ain't investigating anything anyway. So, I mean, if Congress was going to do their job, Trump would have been impeached in the first 30 days, okay? So Congress ain't going to do anything. So what I'm saying to you is, I suspect Byron Allen is a front man, and he knows they're going to take down that law from the 1880s. Actually, from the 1860s.
1866. But we got to take a short break. We're closing in on the top of the hour, so some of our stations can identify themselves. Stay on the line. Stations like 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome to the Carl Nelson Show on Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL radio and live around the world on WOLDCnews.com.
Thank you for staying with us, folks. 6 o'clock straight up in Washington, D.C. Our guest is MarK from Anahiem. We'd like to speak to MarK, 800-450-7876. MarK, I'm going to let you finish your thought, then we got some more folks who want to speak with you.
No, I'm good. But I will say this, it's not just Byron Allen. Right now, J.C. Watts is starting a television network, is he not?
Right.
And all these blacks, oh, God, there's a black guy starting a network. Do you all even know who the hell J.C. Watts is? This guy was in bed with Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh and the folks, and his claim to fame was he was a football star. I used to put down J.C. Watts back in the 90s. Then when they didn't need him anymore, he kind of faded away for a while. So I guess they're bringing him back now. And he's already bragging about one of the first people he's going to give a TV show to when he gets his network is none other than your buddy, Mr. Nelson, Larry Elder. So just because it's a black face, folks, doesn't mean it's somebody like, whoa, come on, folks. These folks ain't conscious. These folks are the tools, man. And there ain't no love lost between Larry Elder and me, man. I'm one of the people who risked both my Marine Corps career and my LAPD career fighting for them. But Mr. Nelson, did you ever hear of the Montfort Point Marines before I told you about them?
No, I did not.
And then I brought a Montfort Point Marine because LAPD used to have this thing called the Devil Pup Luncheon. Devil Pup, for you folks, is just I always call it the Hitler Youth Program the Marine Corps had to get young children early on to be brainwashed into becoming Marines, Because before Eleanor Roosevelt got her husband to force the Marine Corps to take black folks, the Marine Corps was supposed to be as pure as the Aryan Viking race, okay? I'm not making this up. And so in those days, they used to recruit children early on and take them out to like a Boy Scout camp, like down at Camp Pendleton and stuff. They got some other programs similar to it now, but I always call them the Marine Corps Hitler Youth. So anyway, every year LAPD and Marine Corps would have a Marine Corps luncheon up at the LAPD Academy. In fact, I was working for a racist colonel who refused to pin my Major Oakleys on after I'd already been selected for Major. So I went up during that luncheon. I had a Marine Corps general pin them on, okay? And there was nothing she could do about it. But anyway, for one of the luncheons, I took a Montfort Point Marine because I was going to a church out here in Orange County, a Friendship Baptist Church. In fact, that's where my children got to spend time with Rosa Parks, because every time she came to the LA area, she'd always come out to Friendship Baptist Church in Brea. And so one day I'm at the church. I was a Marine Corps captain at the time. And I was wearing my Marine Corps Charlie uniform, and this old black man walked up to me and he goes, "Sir?" And I'm looking at him because this guy is old enough to be my grandfather, right? And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Can I just ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "Can I just touch your bars?" And I'm like, "Oh, yes, sir." And he broke down and started crying. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to even share this story right now, but he broke and started crying because he said, "I've never seen a black Marine Corps officer." And so this gentleman and I, we sat down and we talked, and he started telling me about how he was a Montfort Point Marine. And he, in his wallet, he still had his World War II Marine Corps ID card, which was totally different from what the whites said, because the Montfort Point Marines were always separate. And I was angry because here I thought I knew about Marine Corps history, and this was like back in 1991, and I had never heard of the Montfort Point Marines. Oh, I was mad. And so after meeting this gentleman, I would go over to his house for dinner and stuff on Sundays, and we would sit and talk. And he was good friends, by the way, with, I guess it was a former chief of police for Compton. And it just blew me away how ignorant I had been about our own history. And I couldn't find anything about it, so I started going behind the scenes and digging up history, going, why isn't anybody talking about the Mounted Part Marines? And of course, you, Mr. Nelson, every year on Veterans Day would have Tuskegee Airmen on. So I came on your show like in 1993 when you had Tuskegee Airmen on. I asked them if they had ever heard of Mounted Part Marines, and they had not. So I was like, oh my God. So that was my personal mission in life, was to get the Mounted Part Marines recognized. And I stepped on a lot of toes. And then later on, Clint Eastwood came out with this movie, and there were blacks who actually went to Clint Eastwood on his movie set and said, will you please include black Marines in the movie? And Clint Eastwood refused to do so. So I'm happy to say I'm one of the people who led the charge later on, and Clint Eastwood didn't get an Academy Award for that movie, Flag of Our Fathers. So anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is, because of me behind the scenes helping to fight for the Mounted Part Marines to be recognized, they were awarded the Congressional Medal. And in 2015, I believe the women who you saw featured in the movie about the black women from NASA, they're also being recognized with congressional medals now. But I stepped on a lot of toes, and I risked both my Marine Corps career and my LAPD career. And the only reason I'm mentioning this, because guess whose father was a Mounted Point Marine? Larry Elder. And so they had a special ceremony down at Camp Pendleton. I refused to go to it because my hypocrisy only goes too far. I love the fact that I fought for Larry Elder's father to get that congressional medal, but I'm not going to be in the same room with Larry Elder. True story.
Let's move on. 800-450-7876. Fixico is calling from LA. He's on line 3. Fixico, you have a question for Mark?
Here's a reparation man.
No, I can't even say the word reparation because I made
Fixico, you got to turn your radio down because we're getting feedback. So turn it off for us.
Oh, no, my radio is it's not on. And so I just turned the computer off. But no, I have to say reconciliation because I'm a member of the National Underground Railroad, a private sector partner. But anyway, I have about a minute, and a prediction, and I want him to crush it or confirm it. And concerning Mr. Kanye's announcement that he will run for president in 2024, I know for 2020 we can't trust the polls because of President Trump's anonymous voters. Mr. Kanye may be a genius, but it only takes common sense to realize that if Papa Trump wins a second term, that in 2024 he will bring forth his daughter, Ivanka Trump Kirshner, as a Sarah Palin conservative white woman type candidate for president. And in a beauty contest election, she could win it all. Remember, the Brown versus Board of Education courtroom demonstration proved that blacks will choose the pretty white doll. If Mr. Kanye or Dr. Carson is added as Ivanka's vice president, it could signal a 16-year Trump dynasty and a big problem for the Democratic Party's black vote monopoly. And regarding President Trump's current political baggage, I know Mark knows all about this. It was Hitler's advisors, Goebbels, who said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. What do you think about what I have said, Big Brother Mark?
Well, referring to Goebbels had a personal secretary, and that secretary, before she died...
Because we're getting feedback. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, well, just hang up on me and I'll listen off there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
Okay, Goebbels had a secretary, and his personal secretary, Mr. Nelson, now she died shortly, I believe, after President Trump swore in the office. And do you know she said, looking at Donald Trump, you got your next Hitler?
Mm-hmm.
That's the personal secretary who was Goebbels' secretary. But going back to what the brother was saying about Kanye West, I'm just going to make this very simple. I'm not here to hurt anybody's feelings. I just tell you folks the way it is, okay? And Dick Gregory had to remind me a long time ago to stop apologizing for telling the truth. 1, you don't decide who's going to be president. The Electoral College does. And having said that, Mr. Nelson, because I've been doing this every time I come on your show since Donald J. Trump got elected. Name me one Democratic candidate right now, Mr. Nelson, who can beat Donald Trump.
He's not running yet.
And now you got Michael Moore, the phony Michael Moore, because everybody thinks he's a progressive. I'll just tell you, you know, Michael Moore, he does his movie Fahrenheit 9/11, which was very accurate. But Michael Moore is not some crusader. The very people Michael Moore criticized in Fahrenheit 9/11 are the very people who distributed his movie. Because they want you to see it, because now that you know what you're going to do about it. Having said that, Donald Trump already has enough electoral college votes to win again. And Wall Street is only going to support Donald Trump. The only Democratic candidate they would remotely consider is Joe Biden. I'm just telling you. I'm not going to come on the show and lie to you. I'm just telling you. So, having said that, it doesn't matter whether Kanye West or anybody else runs, because the greatest thing Stalin ever said is it matters not who runs, it matters who counts the votes. Now, Mr. Nelson, we've had all these wildfires out here in California, right? And you know PG&E has been cutting off people's electricity, correct?
Right.
Well, California now is going to electronic voting. Isn't this the same time period that we would be voting next year for a president?
Yeah.
Just imagine you have a few wildfires set in key precinct locations around California, and the lights went out. And when the lights come back on, the voting machines tell you the person you voted for didn't win. I'm just letting y'all know. I'm letting you, we're coming up on a break. Remember, I told you that today, but I'll come back and finish Mr. Fixico's question.
All right, 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark. Your calls are next, right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
To the Carl Nelson Show, Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio.
I'm actually rolling with us amongst our guests is MarK from Anahiem. We begin the number to call to speak to MarK is 800-450-7876. So MarK, I'll let you finish responding to Fixico's question.
Too strong, too black. All right, Mr. Nelson, during the break, I went back and looked through my computer files, and this is something that I shared on several of my Facebook sites on January of 2017, directly related to Fixico. And I said how I had uncensored copies of Benito Mussolini's My Autobiography. I have Adolf Hitler's My New Order, and I also have Hitler's Mein Kampf. Folks, My New Order is far more important than Mein Kampf, because My New Order details Hitler's speeches. And if you look at Hitler's speeches and you look at Trump's speeches, they mirror each other. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. And the woman's name was Brunhilde Pomsel. Her name is spelled B as in boy, R-U-N as in Nancy, H-I-L-D-E. Brunhilde Pomsel, P-O-M-S-E-L. She was the personal secretary for Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Information under Hitler. And this is her direct quote. Hitler was elected democratically, and bit by bit, he got his own way. Of course, that could always repeat itself with Donald Trump. She said that back in 2016. Now, Mr. Nelson, has the Democratic Party been allowing Trump to get his way bit by bit?
Yeah.
And I came on this show in 2012, before anybody even knew Trump was going to run. And I said that if you didn't have your dictator in the White House by 2016, you would have that person in the White House by 2020. And now I hear Maxine Waters and everybody else calling Trump a what? A dictator. I told you folks, I stopped doing radio shows. I stopped doing shows with Mr. Nelson back in 2001 after they passed the Patriot Act. But when I saw what happened with Trayvon Martin and how they were using that murder to foment hatred and anger, I came on this show in 2012 and said how we were headed for a civil war and a world war. Mr. Nelson, it hasn't come out yet, but the Atlantic Monthly has just published their new magazine, and they're telling you how to avoid a civil war. Last night on Coast to Coast AM, they had this veteran, 70-year-old guy, and George Norrie's trying to talk him out of it, and the guy goes, hey, I don't know what you want me to say, but I'm telling you, we are headed for a world war. They're telling you in 2019 what I've been trying to tell you folks since 2012. That's my curse. I can connect the dots. I can see it. I don't understand why other people can't see it. They are fomenting the hatred and anger that's going to lead us to both a civil war in this country and another world war, because they got to reduce the population. I just keep it simple. So as far as Mr. Fixico, when it comes to Kanye West, dude, Kanye West got so much baggage, there's no way he could ever run for office. Seriously. They would allow him to run for office and hope that he could win just to take him down. Kanye West is not a threat. And besides that, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Nelson, doesn't Kanye West support Donald Trump?
Sure does.
So, I mean, come on, folks. So what, you rather have a black Donald Trump in the White House instead of the white one? Give me the real one before give me Kanye West. I'm no fan of Kanye West. Never bought his music, probably never will. He's a great artist, but you know. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not saying this to be demeaning, does he not also suffer from mental issues?
Emotional issues.
Well, call it what you want. I remember when Nixon ran against somebody in 1968, that candidate lost because they talked about how this guy had been seeing a psychiatrist. Nobody talked about the fact that Nixon had been seeing a psychiatrist. So I hope that answered Mr. Fixico's questions. Oh, but I'm sorry that he's gone. I'm going to have to contact him, and I hope that if you bring him on your show, that he gives us more information about this society that's related to the underground, because I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully they'll call him Friday and let us know.
Yes, sir.
And we'll keep moving. 800-450-7876. Molly Bell, straight out of Compton, is on line 4.
Reparations in memory of our ancestors. Yo, Mark, yo, Carl, and yo to the WLDC family. And first of all, Mark, I got to say to you, thank you, of course, for your service, for being in the Marines and all that you've done. You know, my brother was killed in Vietnam in 1966. Lance Corporal Joseph Ray Reynolds, say his name. And for those who listen to Mark, and Mark tell of all these things, the people that he has saved and the people that he did, I have to raise my hand. I'm one of them. In 1992, when they were having the civil unrest, I'm a young girl, about 44. Yeah, that was young. And not very naive in the struggle and actual movement out there for the civil unrest. I think I may have said something, may have angered one of those police or something, and they were about to mess with me. Mark knew me from Carl Nelson's show, and he did not let it happen. So, Mark, I will always be indebted to you that I don't have a police record of any kind, and based on what you've done there. And I am calling you from my landline. And for those who don't know, on February the 3rd, when Dick Gregory was getting his star, that was the day before my birthday, I did get a chance to see Mark, take pictures of him. Yeah, I got pictures, folks. I got them. And get a hug from him, and it was great. But Mark, what I called for today is to say, and I'll listen to your comments off the air, is that I love the movie at Harriet. I thought it was great. Mary reminded me that don't forget that this is not a documentary. It is a movie with artistic license by the person that made it. So tell some of the things that you like, just right quickly. I love that Harriet, we always, Dr. Karinga and others say that we are the ones to live up the moral standard of the world. The fact that they showed that she talked to God, and I believed it with everything inside of me and followed it, made me feel good. I like the fact that when they were calling her Moses, Mark, they said, and you saw this, that this is too cunning, it's too good, it's too tough. This must be a white abolitionist in blackface. Isn't that awesome when we do something that folks will give it to somebody else rather than admit how tough we are? I love that. I do agree with you in what they showed about her leading this army, this expedition, and that it wasn't talked about and given all the propers that it should. But everyone who's listening, shouldn't that make you want to go and read more about Harriet? Find out the truth about Harriet, get involved and find out what she did. Dr. Betty Shabazz says, look for the good and celebrate that. When it comes to Byron Allen, you know, he owning the Weather Channel, the #1 channel. I'm right now. He goes to court on tomorrow, and I'm hoping that everything works out in his favor. I heard what you said, but I'm also one of those to believe that people who are given insight, people who see something and they tell us, that is so that we could act on that. Everything can be changed. It is not etched in stone, and we need the callers, the seers, to tell us exactly what was happening. For those who saw, what was that one with Zeno? You know, I forgot what it was called. That movie where it was anyway. Sometimes the seer in it, she was a black woman, and she was with Keanu Reeves, and she was able to see things, and we could change things when we have righteous people.
The Matrix.
Yeah, the Matrix. Thank you very much. I said a senior moment there on the air. And so she was able to see and therefore make a change. So when you tell me something, because I was one of those ones that protested, and you know it for a fact, when they were doing for Pfeiffer.
Yes, ma'am.
I went down there for all that was happening. I did not know until today that some of the things, the scenes that we saw, because there's nothing funny to black people to see a black man hanging from a tree, and then another black man say, "Those are some good shoes."
Yeah,
good shoes.
What a waste of a good pair of boots.
Yeah, there's nothing funny about that.
Nothing.
So for us, that's what we saw. That's what they gave us. And that's one of the reasons that we did it. And I say to those who are protesting, it was so many black people in the movie that why don't you save your money? Mary and I, we've had good conversations about it, and put a documentary together and tell the truth. But I hope that they look at it, see it for what they've done, and we're going to connect the dots and do what has to be done.
Well, Sister Molly, while you're here, I have a question for you, because you saw the movie.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms about the movie is how they're saying the white man had to be her savior. Because, you know, there's a scene in the movie where there's a black guy who...
He wanted to kill her himself.
Thank you.
He did not want that black man to kill him. He wanted to kill her himself. He had even tried to talk her off the bridge. Some people said that wasn't true. It may not have been true, but he tried to talk off the bridge. Come on back. I love you. I mean, you know, I'm gonna treat you right.
Sister Molly, here's the thing. I want you to know something. You are the first person that I've spoken to that even realizes that. People are putting out this story how the white guy saved her. He wasn't saving her. He wanted to torture her and kill her himself.
That's what he said he wanted to do. He said, tar and feather you, strip you, skin you. He wanted, and he did not want that black man to do it. And what I saw is that we are not massive killers. People were saying also, Mark, that about those trackers, that we don't have those. Oh, yeah.
We do.
We got black folks right now who collaborate with the system of white supremacy to take us down. So that was a way of us seeing a collaborator. Some people say, oh, they didn't have any black trackers. Maybe they didn't.
Oh, but yes, they did.
That knew that movie for what it was.
We got to take a break. 800-450-7876. I'll let Molly finish a question for Mark right after the short break on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark Anahiem. Before we let you speak with Molly Bell, straight out of Compton. So, Molly, your question for Mark.
Well, wait a minute. Before Molly asks her question, I just want to share, because see, Molly brought something up that's very interesting. She remembers what happened in 1992 and how the cops were coming after her, and I didn't let them step off. Molly, you remember Shadid, Gary Barber?
Oh, yes.
Now, Gary Barber was a Muslim. In fact, Gary Barber was in prison, got stabbed in the eye, and his life was saved by one of the Black Panthers, Johnny Spain. Okay? when they were having major prison riots out here back in the 60s and 70s. Gary Barber used to sell bean pies down there in the Willowbrook area.
Known as what?
In the Watts area. So, depending on what side of Imperial Highway you were on, one side was the city of LA, the other side was in the county. This is how tragic things are, folks, okay? So one day, now remember, that's the sheriff's side, but I'm LAPD, so I drive my LAPD car into the shopping mall. And all the blacks were watching me, like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Who's this Uncle Tom? And he was out there selling his bean pies. So I get out my police car and I said, get up, put your hands on your head and turn around. Now, Molly Bell, this brother hadn't done anything. But black folks are so used to white cops harassing them down there. He just got up, put his hands behind his head, and turned around. And so I walked up behind her. Now a big crowd is gathering around us like, what the hell? First of all, this pig is down here messing with the brother who's not doing anything. And then there's got to be Uncle Tom. So now I come up to the brother. I grab his hands. And then I whisper in his ear, so I heard you always wanted to meet Mark from Anahiem.
Oh, boy.
And then he turns around with this big smile, and we give each other a big hug in the parking lot. And now we had a big crowd of black, because these folks were going to lynch him. For you folks who don't know, in California, the term lynch is not the same thing it means other places. Lynch in California means when somebody is arrested by the cops, you take them away from the cops. We had a big crowd of black folks who were mad because Gary Barber didn't bother anybody. He hadn't been doing anything, and they were going to take him out of my custody. And they didn't know what to do because they see Gary Barber now hugging me in the parking lot and giving me a bean pie. Now, I say that to you folks because I gave him one of my business cards. And do you know, Mr. Nelson and Molly, and for the listeners out there, I can't begin to tell you how many times he told me later on he would get harassed by the police, pull out my business card, and they drove off on their merry way. So when you folks are talking about, because, we recently had the movie Black and Blue that came out, which I thought was a great movie too. But in that movie, the message keeps saying, well, you're no longer one of us, you're one of them. I spent my last 7 years in Watts, okay? And there's not one black person in Watts who could ever say one of the cops working underneath me disrespected them. That's why you have to be out there and be a part of the system, because when I was down there, I know I made a difference down there in the hood.
Oh, yes. And during that time, for those who don't know, Gary was married to a Christian.
He was a Muslim and married to a Christian for more than 3 decades.
Woman working hand in hand. Like I said, for Mark and I, Carl, we go a long way back. You said to Carl in the beginning, he don't tout. He don't brag about what all he knows and what all he's been through. But he has been through that. And I'm glad for the time that I had to go through him with him. And one time I asked the police, well, this guy that helped me, his name is Mark, and he's from Anahiem. And he says, no, we have a lot of folks on there. And then I used to call in and said, I don't believe your name is Mark. I believe you from Anahiem when you would come on Carl's show. I was just saying that my final question that I'll listen to off the air.
Before you ask your question, this is important because, see, you were down there. You were in the hood. It's very important you tell the listeners what it was like before we came on Carl's show and pointed out to them in Imperial Garden, down there in Imperial Gardens, where they filmed most of that movie Training Day.
That's right.
Remember they had the fences around the projects?
That's right.
Which way did the spikes go?
The spikes were up.
And the spikes were inward. Not for you to keep you out of the projects.
But to keep you in.
Thank you very much.
And that's why when I went to Ghana with Carl, that's my first trip to Africa, which was the fulfillment of a destination for me, was that I wanted to go to Africa. And I went with Carl. And when we got there, we saw the dungeons and the slave castles, and the guns and all the cannons were pointed inland. They were not pointed outward even to this day. And so I said, so we know that those guns, those things were to keep us in place so that we couldn't run. So I'm just saying there is so much history that we need to tell. And for those who don't know, I got pictures of just about everything. And I know they have other callers that are waiting on you. So I do see your Facebook pictures. I see you surfing. I didn't know black people surf that much. I knew Didon Kumasi did.
Yes,
a surfer.
I
line dancing. I keep on saying, this man, you got a whole bunch of jackets. That most people don't know nothing about it. I mean, how you doing country? Yahoo! I mean, I didn't know that. And the way that you talked about ADOS right quick is that for me, if MarK, if you and I were brothers and sisters in Africa, and the slave master came and took you to Brazil and took me to the United States, are we not still brothers and sisters?
Absolutely.
Are we not still brothers and sisters?
Absolutely.
And for those who separate us like that, they're wrong. It's not fair. But I'm hoping that some of them will look at it. And I do believe, even Dick Gregory said that we would get reparation. It would be a time when we would get it. And so I just wanted to say to you, MarK, is that for those of us who saw the movie, and for those of us who, Dr. Karinga and others are going to do a critical analysis of it, not on those who, like black folk, the people who loved it, who understood it, but what Hollywood wanted to show and what Hollywood was doing it. So I say to all of you, and MarK, you could tell me off the air, what do you think about this? Save your ticket. Make sure that it has Harriet on it, because, they remember what they used to do before. You could tell them, well, we would buy ticket, and then we get home, that wasn't a movie that we saw, so that the black movie didn't get all of its credit. Save your ticket, and at the end, MarK, it showed who were the historical reference people who helped to put that together. So why don't you save your ticket, make a copy of it, send it to them, send it to Cassie, send it to whomever you want, and say, I supported you, but next time, in the next movie, think about this. I think that that's a great idea, because I saw a whole bunch of black folks in that movie, so that means that they had jobs. And to Fixico, who is just doing so much, I'm so glad, and I thank you, MarK, for helping him to get on other shows after meeting him real good on Carl Nelson. I close by saying, all you prayer warriors out there, you know what you've got to do. You've got to keep fasting. You've got to keep praying, because the struggle continues. But always, to God be the glory. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, MarK.
All right, MarK, you want to comment anything on all he said?
I just want to expound on what I was saying earlier, because see, Molly Bell, once again, Mr. Nelson, was your show here in L.A. We had to bring that to the attention of people. The projects had the fences with the spikes turned inward. Okay? To keep black people inside. And by the way, sir, Mr. Nelson, the word project is just another word for experiment. And that's how they housed us. And, when I worked in Watts had 5 housing projects. In fact, there were more people living in Watts in housing projects than anywhere else in the United States, because Cabrini Green was gone. Because Cabrini, oh my God, I could tell some stories about Cabrini Green, but yeah, Cabrini Green was gone. But you had 5 houses. You had the Imperial Court, you had Nickerson Gardens, you had Jordan Downs, you had Avalon Gardens, and then you had one that was renamed for this woman that was on the county board of supervisors. So I'm Gonzaga. So I mean, there were 5 housing projects just in Watts area alone, Mr. Nelson. More people were living in housing projects just in Watts than anywhere else in the United States.
All right, let's keep moving. We want to talk to you. 800-450-7876. Prince. Mr. Prince is calling from Alabama. It's on line 5. Mr. Prince, you have a question for MarK?
Big wheels keep on turning. Come honey down.
How you doing, sir?
Every day is a holiday.
I have a quick question for you. Other than Donald Trump Jr. getting booed, what do you think about the Chinese? How angry are they with America? And we know that half of the apartments in LA are owned by Chinese. what is their plan for America?
All right. So if you all don't know what Prince from Alabama is referring to, Donald Trump Jr. was here at UCLA, which UCLA claims that they were not the ones who sanctioned that or didn't approve it or whatever, but he was there, so obviously they knew about it. And he actually got booed by Trump supporters. And the reason he got booed by Trump supporters is because after he was trying to promote his book, he refused to do a question and answer period. So, with the Chinese anger, Hong Kong, I'm sure, is what he's referring to. In 1997, Hong Kong went back to the Chinese. And I've spoken about this before on the show, but the Chinese government now is becoming a little bit less patient and a little less tolerant of the protests there. Basically, what you have are people who are used to living sort of under the Western way of life, like in Great Britain or the United States, but they're still part of China. And China wants them to live like... Yes, sir.
Yeah, hold that thought right there. We're going to take a short break. 800-450-7876 to speak to Mark. Your calls are next on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Introducing the Capital One Walmart Rewards Card. Earn
Carl Nelson Show, Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. This is Mark. Most of you know Mark's real name is Harriet from Anahiem. We just this the Dick Gregory still calling the early warning system. Gregory should say, keep that brother close. He knows too much. Anyway, before we get back to that, let me just tell you some of the other folks who are going to be stopping by in the next few days. Critical thinking professor, a retired professor now, Dr. David Horn will be here. He just got back from Ghana, and he's also going to talk about reparations and the Back to Africa movement that Ghana has started. Also, metaphysician Dr. B. Dr. B is going to discuss mind control and perception management, also telomeres and parasites. So if you're in the DMV, tell all your friends to keep their radios locked on 1450 WOL, where information is power. So, Mark, I'll let you finish responding to Mr. Prince's question about the Chinese.
Yeah, take that worm medicine. Get rid of those parasites. The Chinese government now is becoming a little less tolerant and a little less patient with those protesters in Hong Kong. Basically, you have a bunch of, spoiled, as far as they're concerned, spoiled Chinese folks who still think the Western way from back in the day when Hong Kong was a British, occupied territory. And the Chinese are saying, one China, you're all going to conform to one China rule. And they're starting to shoot down people. It's not as bad as Tiananmen Square yet, Mr. Nelson. Folks have no idea. All they ever show you on Tiananmen Square is the one person standing in front of the tank, and the tank doesn't run them over. More than 10,000 people got killed in Tiananmen Square, right?
Yeah, they don't show that though. You're right.
No, hell no. and Daddy Bush was president at the time. He didn't do anything because his uncle owned 7 golf courses over there at the time. Because Daddy Bush was sent over to China. He's the one who opened the door to China when Nixon was president. And that's when they brought the panda bears to D.C. And
wait a sec. I did not know that because then didn't he go? Was it China? Where he threw up and embarrassed himself?
No, that was late. That was after he was no longer president. What I'm saying is back in 1970. Okay. I did a show. It's funny. I did a show with you like back in 1993, where I told people there was no gold at Fort Knox because Nixon had started selling off all the gold to China, $35 an ounce. And the next day in the LA Times, there was an article. Nixon sold the gold off at $35 an ounce. Okay. So, but the LA Times, they always listen to your show and then go back and do stories because these guys don't have a clue. And then they listen to something I said on the show and they're like, is that true? Just like the time I came on and I told y'all how Ross Perot, Daddy Bush, and Bill Clinton were not only related by blood, but they were all from the same small town in England. And that Clinton was going to win because he had more royal blood. And then a week later in the LA Times, Bill Clinton has more royal blood than I was like, anyway, but what happened was Nixon sent Daddy Bush over to, because you have to remember, what happened was And for you folks who don't know, it was Daddy Bush who gave Hoover the name Oswald on 23 November 1963. Yeah, I'm just telling you, he's dead now, but, I knew Daddy Bush. But, no, Daddy Bush was the one who, businessman George Bush gave J. Edgar Hoover the name Lee Harvey Oswald after Kennedy was assassinated. And, he was OSS boy, ONI too. And we had the church committees back in the 70s. And the church committees, Bill Colby basically spilled the beans on a lot of stuff like the Phoenix program and a whole lot of other stuff folks didn't know CIA was involved in. And of course, Bill Colby later on supposedly drowned. But Daddy Bush came in because what happened, you had Spiro Agnew was first taken down, and then he was replaced by Gerald Ford. And then Nixon was taken down. And then Gerald Ford became president, and then Gerald Ford picked Rockefeller as his vice president. You had a president and vice president in the White House that nobody had voted for. And so in the meantime, Gerald Ford picked Daddy Bush to be CIA director. So he was the one who basically held CIA together after all the fallout from the church committees and Bill Colby's testimony. Oh, if you didn't know this, folks, Bill Colby is basically one of the guys more than anybody else responsible for bringing the Dalai Lama out of Tibet. I should write a book, huh? So anyway, and I was angry because in '96 I was doing a radio show with you, Mr. Nelson, down in Charleston, South Carolina, when Bill Colby died, and they said it was a drowning, but we won't go down that rabbit hole today. So ever since the '70s, when Nixon was president and Bush went over to China, we've had a cozy relationship with China. And so when Bush became president and Tiananmen Square happened, he didn't get involved because by that time his brother was over there. And also Pepsi-Cola. Nixon used to be the #1 attorney for Pepsi-Cola after he was robbed of the election by Kennedy in 1960. And Pepsi-Cola had major business deals and ties over in China, thanks to Nixon being the attorney for Pepsi-Cola. So, what you will probably see if the protest continues in Hong Kong, it may elevate to the level of Tiananmen Square. And trust me, folks, now that years have gone by, you might be able to find some of the photographs. I was only to see it only because of who I am and who I knew. But, oh, God, some of the weapons that they used against the protesters in Tiananmen Square and around the surrounding areas, it was not a pretty sight. But the only thing anybody ever talks about is the one female who stood in front of the tank and challenged the tank to run her over. That's not Tiananmen Square, okay? Literally tens of thousands, well, 10,000, at least 10,000 people died and far more were injured. They use weapons against the human population that you normally use to take down an airplane.
Mm.
And so as the brother is asking this question, if these protests continue over in Hong Kong, the only reason it hasn't been done yet, because we have so much banking over there, but now the protest is having an impact on the banking industry, and you can't mess with the money. They're going to put those protesters down. Well, hang on, but as far as LA goes, right now you have like 37,000 people in downtown LA who are homeless, or as they call it, houseless. Meanwhile, 80% of the brand new condominiums and apartments in downtown LA are unoccupied. China is buying up property around the world, and they built a lot of condos in China that are unoccupied, and they're waiting for the economy to collapse, where only the wealthy can afford these hotels and condos, and then they're going to start renting them out. And this economy is going to collapse. In fact, if Trump keeps messing around with China, China will pull their card and cause this economy to collapse tonight. They're just hoping that China doesn't do it until after the elections, because if China takes down the U.S. economy before the elections, the Republicans will not get reelected.
Right. And then the last thing, we talk all this smack, but I know Korea, I'm not sure if China does, but I know that in Korea, the men have conscription. So I'm not sure if China has it also, but we
of course they do. In fact, there's a border war going on right now between China and Myanmar. I still call it Burma. But there's border wars going on between China and all of its bordering countries. You don't hear about it, but there's a shooting war going on the border. And yeah, China has conscription. Why do you think I said Kamsa Hanida? Most of my martial art instructors were Korean, so yeah, I'm familiar with what's going on in Korea, and I don't recognize South or North. I just call it Korea, and there's going to be one united Korea. So,
yes, sir. All right, thank you for the time, sir.
All right, thanks, Mr. Prince.
I don't know anything. Mr. Nelson, before we move on, just because I know we always do this at the end, for those who want to try to get in touch with me once I get out of Facebook jail, you can find me at MarK from Anahiem, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook. And I'm not ignoring you. I just can't respond because I'm in Facebook jail.
Likewise.
Yes,
MarK, a tweet from London. They say Benito Mussolini was a MI5 agent, according to Greg Hallett. So was Adolf Hitler, who was training psychological warfare from the members of the Tavistock Institute. What does MarK think about this statement?
I've always said, one of the very first shows I ever did with you, I tried to explain to folks, Hitler was not blonde. He didn't have blue eyes. He had cavities. He had one leg that was longer than the other. Hitler was an intelligence agent that was sent in to monitor the Nazi party, and then he ended up taking it over. I've been telling you folks that for more than 3 decades. Seriously. Hey, the British, man, there's something else, man. Maybe, but like I remember coming on your show back in the 90s, and I said, but being a Marine Corps officer, I'm just a loyal servant to the Queen because I've never had a Marine Corps general whose personal secretary wasn't from Great Britain. The Queen has her tentacles all over the planet. Yeah, so you will get no argument from me about Mussolini or Hitler having been influenced by the United Kingdom.
Another tweeter says, could you please ask MarK if he would consider writing a book filled with needed history and blacks who keep as a history?
Yeah. Okay, listen. No, I'm not joking when I tell you this. After this show, I will be checking my break line. I do radio shows with Carl Nelson or sometimes Patrick Weaver, and what'll happen is I'll go out to my truck and I'll find my antifreeze bottle down by my brake pedal. Now, why do you think I found my antifreeze bottle there, Mr. Nelson?
You left it there by mistake?
Hell no. That's their way of letting me know, stay in your lane, because today I left the antifreeze bottle. Tomorrow I'll just cut your brake line or put a bomb in your truck. No, I'm serious as a heart attack when I'm sharing this with you. Or they'll come out sometimes and what they'll do is steal my ashtray and don't steal all the other stuff that's in my truck that's worth far more, just to let me know that they were inside my vehicle. I will not be writing a book.
No telling what they do on the telephone, though. We made it pretty well so far.
Today, we did on the show, but earlier today they were messing with us on the line. Oh, and by the way, you think we're doing very well. I've been having all kinds of phone problems. I just haven't been mentioning it.
Yeah, people. In the earlier show we talked about it. It's because I try to stay under the radar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm just coaching my little white girls in surfing. I don't care about the politics. Donald Trump, go Donald Trump, MAGA, MAGA. Too late.
Too late, right?
They got files on you. They got files on me. They've always had files on me though because they created me. So I'm on this show because they allow me to be on this show. They want me to tell you what's going on because now that you know, what are you going to do about it?
Right. And they want to know how much you know as well.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
Yeah,
I've had even at the surf con, we just had the International Junior World Championship surfing on Huntington Beach. And even at that contest, I had a guy who was on the beach pretending to be just a surfer. And I got into a little discussion with this photographer. He's like, oh, well, Trump, they got that ISIS leader. I go, you don't know they got that ISIS leader. You only know what they're telling you. And he's arguing me. Well, no, they got him, blah, 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 blah. I go, listen, you only know what they're telling you. Because Russia killed that guy 5 years ago. It's just like, Bin Laden. Bin Laden was dead in 2001. I said, Bhutto from India even said that, and then she was dead later on. And then all of a sudden, the guy sitting on the beach acting like a surfer goes, it wasn't India, it was Pakistan, and then he walked off, just to let me know he was there watching me.
Wow.
True story.
Wow.
Y'all stay black. Bye.
All right. Folks are out of here. Stay strong. Stay positive. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock right here on 1450 WOL, where the information
is king. Y'all. Hey, I just want to tell you all thank you. Hold on, let me get this off before this computer starts acting funny. Thank you for watching the show, the live version. I'm going to still try to put together the audio with the actual imagery that I had to go with it. I would try it on here, but it would have lagged too bad. But by the way, Sister Kathy, Patrick Weaver is this guy right here. This power is mine.
From Anahiem, so let me just give you a little back. Anahiem. We'll see.
Oh, I don't understand why it's not okay now. But I just want to say, tonight's show, Carl Nelson's show, was a very powerful show, and they touched on so many relevant points that's occurring right now. This isn't happening a million years ago. It's happening right now. With that being said, I'm going to take my little butt to bed. I've been fighting with YouTube, trying to get this information to you guys tonight because I have felt it was really important information. So this will conclude TPIM SR Live rebroadcast of the Carl Nelson Show. I want to give all the credit to Carl Nelson and all the great work that he has done for the people as far as giving us true stories, things to think about. And once again, guys, MarK is not his only guest. Carl has great guests on all the time. So please check out his program. Check him out on Facebook, The Carl Nelson Show. Support the brother because we're all in this tragic arrangement together. I ask you to live your life with integrity without hate, envy, or greed. As always, brothers and sisters, please, let's try to be kinder to each other. Peace in power, unity in victory, and respect in dignity. Liberation. I'm out.